Hi, everyone. It is Friday, April 8th. Welcome to the show. This is Normalize It, the show where we talk about things that are, a little bit difficult to talk about at work or in a business setting, something like that. Today on the show, I've got Dr. Dan. He's a psychologist and he specializes in the psychology of meaning, also called logotherapy and existential analysis. He spends most of his days in one-on-one and group consulting for business, leadership, and organizational teams, and also sharing in the science of mental health and meaning through professional speaking and his podcast called The Meaning Project. Dr. Dan, welcome to the show. Why don't we just kick it off right now? Let's get started. What's logotherapy and existential analysis?
Let's get right to it, Cam. First of all, thanks for having me. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about logotherapy. So it's a little known area of psychology, although it's about 100 years old now, right?
Oh,
This
no way.
came right out of Freud and Adler, two of the big names in early psychology. Their student, Dr. Viktor Frankl, Freud said, hey, man is a being in search of pleasure, right? We all know the pleasure principle, even if we didn't study that much psychology. His student Adler said, no, people want power. So you got pleasure and power. And then Frankl comes in and says, I disagree. I think man is a being in search of meaning. And it kind of sticks. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, he shares this idea. He was a brilliant neurologist and psychiatrist in Vienna, Austria. And he's going around helping and it's working. And then, of course, World War II happens. He was Jewish. He finds himself in a Nazi concentration camp for 3 years. So he has to take these ideas, right, and really put them to work through some of the most difficult times in human history.
Mm-hmm.
And he survived and he came out and he took these ideas and he wrote the book, Man's Search for Meaning, one of the top 10 books of the past 100 years. Great read, easy read, where he recounts his time in the concentration camps, but then also my favorite part, I don't know if it's everybody's, is what the chapter called Logotherapy in a Nutshell.
Okay.
And he just takes all of his ideas. And this book, I mean, when he was liberated from the concentration camps, was the first thing he got out. He took a week and he's like, I got to get these ideas out of my head and on paper. And then from there, he is a prolific author and speaker.
That's so cool. So meaning, I guess that's what it's all kind of about. Tell me more about, I want to hear more about meaning, because a lot of people I work with, they have, I want to say almost like a calling. I work with a lot of accessibility professionals. We feel the need that this is something that we need to do. It's important in the world. Where we consult with tech companies. They don't get the message, but maybe we'll get to that in a little bit here. So what does it all mean? Like, so here I've got meanings. I'm an accessibility professional. I want to help tech companies get better at their digital accessibility. I want to make sure that no matter what person and whatever their abilities are when accessing their technology, their web, their mobile apps or stuff like that, I want to make sure there's a calling for me. I want to make sure that people it's equal. Everyone can access that no matter what their abilities are. What do you have to say about that, Dr. Dan?
Well, so much, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. Like what you do is meaningful. You're helping people. You're creating. You're reaching out and trying to achieve some equity and fairness for people. And there's definitely meaning in that. And just in chatting with you, I can see that you're fulfilled. You have purpose, right? And when we are able to engage in these things, when we have meaningful work, when we feel like we're helping others, it's a step to being fully well and healthy, right? When our goals to find meaning, to discover meaning in our lives, when there are obstacles there, we find ourselves subjected to what Frankl called the existential vacuum, right? What we see today is depression, anxiety, substance abuse, things like this.
A lot, yeah. And it's on the rise. I mean, at least what I hear on the news and stuff like that. I'll admit I'm not going to go into the research, or I haven't gone into the research, but every day on the news, it seems like there's a crisis after crisis after crisis.
Yeah. Well, we talk so often about the mental health crisis, especially in the past 2 years coming out of the pandemic. And yeah, people are struggling. And my belief, my studies say it has a lot to do with this, these obstacles to finding meaning, difficult work situations. We see many people, finding their work meaningless, and so they just leave, right? We have this great resignation crisis. But on the other hand, people are finding different ways to engage in work to help people to transcend themselves and achieve and discover this meaning.
So There's so much I want to talk to you about. There's so many questions I have because I guess meaning is so important. I know that I think it ebbs and flows. At least for myself, it has as well. I've felt, many times in my career, even when I know that I'm helping people at the end. And this is really interesting that we're talking about this now, just after I did a big conference this morning on getting advocates and trying to help and coach and teach them how to communicate better, because I feel there's a lot of people in this diversity, equity, and inclusion space who we have meaning, but we give so much that sometimes when it falls short, it like people don't listen to us and we get demoralized and we say, wow, is this really the space I'm trying to give and give and give and help and help and help. But then all of a sudden I don't get the results I want and I'm frustrated because of it. And I just want to leave it, right? I want to quit. I don't want to be in this area anymore. DEI is not the space for me. I'll go back to coding or something like that. What do you have to say about something like that or those feelings?
Well, again, when that drive is frustrated, we experience that anxiety, that depression, this existential vacuum. But I think you make a really good point that when our expectations are not met, and sometimes it's an opportunity to check our expectations, to look at our attitudes, and that is one of the ways that logotherapy talks about how we find meaning. Right. So we call it the meaning triangle. There are three main ways in our experiential values. Right. What we take from life, what we experience being out in nature, being with other people, our creative values, which certainly apply to work. Right. Our ability to create and shape our world and our environment, and then our attitudes. Our choices of how we want to approach the world, even in difficult situations, right? We all experience suffering in life. We all experience difficulties, but we can choose our attitudes and how we want to relate to it. And I can't think of a better example of that than a gentleman who spent 3 years in the Nazi concentration camps and was able to come out. And he writes about it in Man's Search in many of his books, but how helping others helped him to be able to get up every day and to go about the difficult act of living during those times.
So you said, I was just about to call them 3 pillars, but the triangle is attitude, and another one is, you have to help me with the other 2.
Creative,
right,
and experiential.
And experience.
So another way to, what's that?
Experiential.
So another way to look at it is what we take from life in our experience, what we give to life in our creativity, and how we relate to life in our attitudes.
Okay. And I'm imagining, I know a lot of parallels to that, right? If you only have one, or if you only have 2, but you're missing one, I guess you kind of fall short, like one of those 3-legged stools, right? If you
well, in some ways, but I like to think of it, in any given day, you can seek any one of these, all 3 of them, in different ways.
So, okay, now I'm in business. I'm a leader, something like that. I don't need this. This is too woo-woo for me. Actually, I find I'm speaking about that a lot, or maybe you've heard those types of objections before, right? I don't need meaning. I'm doing the job. I just do this for the paycheck or stuff like that. In your clients, in your line of work, I mean, you must get clients saying stuff like that. I'm just looking at some of the show notes here that, you must get that type of objection. I don't know, maybe if not all the time, at least frequent enough that I'm hearing a lot of ahas when I ask that.
Right. Well, there's 2 different areas I work in, right? First of all, just, one-on-one consultation, mentoring. Sure. And people will hear my podcast or hear me speak somewhere and it turns on some light bulbs, right? Like, oh, that's what I've been missing. Yes, let's work with that. But in the work environment, sometimes that is considered a soft skill, too woo.
Yeah.
And that's, unfortunately, I think that's why we're seeing so many people leaving the workforce and leaving current jobs, because people aren't relating to that. Our work, where we spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day every week, needs to be something that we find meaningful in some ways, whether it's just helping another person in the work that we do, recognizing how we're helping society in our work, or just maybe how we're helping the company can be meaningful. But if there's no meaning in it, if you're just there for 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day, I mean, that's a recipe for burnout, frustration, anxiety, depression. So as a leader, I think we are responsible for ensuring that our work environments have some meaning, that people have the opportunity to be creative, to create, and that it's a positive experience, a positive culture, a positive work environment. And we can also shape our attitudes in it as well.
Yeah. While you were speaking, I was trying to remember when I used to do more development, like hands-on. That was a super creative process, trying to figure out and approach a problem in a different way every single time. I don't get that very much anymore, at least not from from the job. I have to think of different ways of being creative, but I remember a lot of developers will defend that point. No, development is creating, and maybe you don't have the other aspects. But when you were speaking, I was also thinking about, like, I may have maybe a bad example of this, but when I'm at a loss for meaning, when I don't have that meaning, when I haven't like found it, how do you advise people on going to find that in their careers and their jobs and maybe even in their life? Last week we had Kyla on, who talked about burnout, and you said that word, that magical word that I think we're all kind of thinking about these days, coming out of the pandemic now, hopefully a little bit less, but kind of that great resignation too. How do you find meaning in a job or in a career even?
So many ways, right? First of all, I think if it's a career, it's something you're choosing, and there's a path to it, and there's ways to grow in that career, right? And I think growing in a career is meaningful, right? Seeking new knowledge, looking to grow as an individual. But if it's a repetitious or even boring job, if you're truly just there for the paycheck, there are ways to find, relating to the people around you. There's still an opportunity for growth there. There's an opportunity to be selfless and help those around you. But then also, if you truly feel it's meaningless, I think it's time to maybe talk to those people who are leading the organization, to bring that up, to suggest we've got to do something a little bit different here. And if they truly don't care, well, maybe it's an opportunity to find a different job, or to look into a career path.
Well, that's pretty big. I mean, we could maybe talk about my subject, like how do we communicate that, how do you go and tell your boss about that? Maybe you actually have advice. Maybe that's something that you'd even talk about. How do you go and approach that? Because that's something that I think we feel a bit shy talking about, right? In big business. So you think of corporate America, corporate Canada too. I don't want to talk to my boss about meaning or feeling that I don't have meaning in work. I think that's almost, downplayed, as if I don't want to, like, who am I to talk about meaning at work? Just kind of do your job. What do you say to someone who comes at you like that?
Well, if you're okay with that, if you're okay just doing the job for your 8 or 10 hours a day, that's okay, as long as you are finding meaning elsewhere in life, as long as you're able to experience life, to truly engage with other people outside of work. It's difficult, right? I mean, you are spending a significant part of your life in this work, and if you're not finding it meaningful, I think that's a recipe for a lot of the anxiety and depression and substance abuse we find in our world today. So if you don't want to talk to your boss, again, maybe it's time to look elsewhere. But I would say that if you are feeling this, then it's more than likely those people that supervise you, or a step above or 2 steps above where you're at, are probably feeling it too, and might appreciate you bringing it to their attention.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of courage in having this kind of conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, I don't want to say a few years back, because maybe it just wasn't on my radar, but definitely when, like, during the pandemic and speaking and hearing about people all over LinkedIn, where I spend a lot of my time, that whole idea of burnout culture, it's still very present. It's still there. And, but I don't hear many people talk about the few steps after, what they did to resolve it. And I would love to hear if anyone has any comments about that. It'd be so great to hear what your story is, and or throw a question up in the comment section here, because I'd love to see if Dr. Dan, if you'd unpack some of those, but that's neat, because it does take a lot of courage to go talk to your boss or your manager about that. What about more like mentorship? Can you actually mentor someone on meaning? Like, is that?
Absolutely, I do it every day, and that's what gives my life a lot of meaning very
often.
I
bet. Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the areas in logotherapy I talk a lot about is this idea of, we find meaning, we have an opportunity, maybe even a duty, to find meaning in every moment, right? We are faced with how many choices on a daily basis, from, whether we get up at the first alarm or the fifth alarm in the morning is a choice. And that can provide meaning. If you're getting up with the first alarm, I would assume you're probably doing something pretty enjoyable or positive reading, going for a run, talking to the dogs, maybe just sipping a cup of coffee.
That's mine. Last one. Sipping a cup of coffee, looking at the garden every morning.
Absolutely. I love that. That's the best part about getting up early is that
Yep.
first cup of coffee while the house is nice and quiet
Absolutely.
and the
Yeah.
dogs are ready to just hang out. So meaningful. You see, you got me going about my morning routine. What were we talking about?
Well, wondering about mentorship.
Mentorship, right? Of course. So teaching people how to make those meaningful decisions on a daily basis, just recognizing them like we just did there, breaking down our day, looking for the meaning in every moment, every decision we make. We each have one of the ones I use a lot is you can either choose to sit there and watch TV or go to your kid's sporting event or to engage with other people. There's always an opportunity to find more meaning. And don't get me wrong, sometimes, maybe even today, sitting on the couch and watching a little bit of golf will be very meaningful and relaxing for me.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But we always have those opportunities. And then we also have opportunities to share meaning with others by being selfless, by transcending ourselves, and by working to serve others. Can be meaningful for us, but come on, it also makes a much better culture and world.
Yeah, in a lot of my coaching sessions around accessibility advocacy, I talk about you need to revel in the coaching aspect of it. Don't get so hung up on the results, because I know for me, so going out and speaking to large organizations about digital accessibility, sometimes it falls flat. It's not in their project timeline. We haven't worked on their goals enough. We haven't figured out I care about it. It's like they come and say, it's not that I don't care about people with disabilities. I do care, but I just can't plan it right now. I'm too overwhelmed. I've got my own thing. And I have to remind people that you got to enjoy that coaching process. You got to enjoy the sitting down and working with those business leads, that team, those developer, whoever. You got to revel in that aspect, because that's when you'll see the true change over time. It's not coming in there like a bulldozer and saying, "Oh, you don't listening to me now. Well, then forget it. You just don't care. I don't care about you either." That I think is this big tension that kind of happens in at least my industry. You ever notice anything like that? Is that something that kind of comes up? Or
I think so. I think when it comes to change management, right? That's a big buzzword lately. When organizations need change, there's that way of coming in and we're going to do it and we're going to change it and you're just going to have to get on board. Whereas, partnering with the people that you're asking to change, encouraging, looking the positives, all these other things is so much easier, healthier. It might take a little bit more time, but, getting that buy-in is incredibly helpful, and letting people know that they're part of the change, not that they're just being asked to change.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one. Getting people's involvement into any of this kind of stuff. It's hard to change. And I mean, you as a coach, as a mentor, as a psychologist, I guess, if someone comes in resistant, if they've been forced to step into maybe your office, I don't know how. Do you actually have an office?
Yes, I do.
Still an office?
We're back in the office these days. Yes.
That's a whole thing. Maybe we can talk about, virtual versus this. That there must have been a huge disconnect there. But when someone's forced to go to a meeting, they must just be so different than someone who goes on their own free will, right, to go and talk about this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, when we're forced to do something, there's resistance.
Yeah.
Just naturally, and trying to get through that resistance, either as a leader, a manager, or just individually, that's hard.
Yeah.
But when you have buy-in, when you have motivation, when it's meaningful, when it's something you want to do, I mean, all of us, find more joy and happiness and definitely meaning in that.
Yeah. What I found that it tends to be, I was just speaking with someone yesterday about this. In fact, I've been going back to an office lately. It's been nice just to go see colleagues in person. In fact, I joined this client when I was December of 2020. So December 2020. Yeah. So I've been there like a year and a half helping them out. I'd never met any of these people face to face. We went to the office twice a week and it was great. It was great just to sit down and have sushi with them. It was something that was so nice to go and, hey, what else do you do? Oh, I play piano. Really? I play piano too. That's not something I ever met. And it kind of puts a face to them. I don't know how else to say it. It puts that, and that it's a reason to come to the office is more than just yet another Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting or whatever you have there. And that's huge.
We are wired for connection, right?
Yeah.
And more than just through a screen. And so what's been great for me is I see so many people returning to offices, returning to their workplace. And it's amazing just how much healthier they get so quickly.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that. I want to
Well,
hear.
absolutely, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I was just talking to a group before this, and we were talking about trainings over Zoom. I had to do a training 2 years ago in the height of the pandemic. It was a 5-day training. I was excited. I
Oh,
was
yeah.
so looking forward to traveling and meeting people and getting to the place and doing the training. And then it got switched to virtual.
Okay.
5 8-hour day, and they tried
That's
their
long.
best, but 5 8-hour days on a Zoom screen was difficult. And
Yeah.
many of us, that was just 1 week for me. Many people have spent the past 2 years or now permanently transitioning to work from home and screen time, which can be nice in some ways.
Yep.
But we certainly need to get out there and experience other people and just have that connection that we don't make like this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's something in being live and on camera. And I know that there's a lot of people who don't like that, right? They don't like having that. I really believe that the more, connected, engaged that you can be, that the better it is. And in fact, the better the meeting is. But it is still a very one directional conversation, right? Like both of us talking at the same time over microphones is so different than two people talking at the same time in person, right? You still catch a few more things if you're in person. I mean, what a difference for me. It was really nice to meet my team yesterday. And I hope that other people are feeling that. I know that a lot of people are quite resistant or nervous about going back to an office. Do you ever, what do you say to people like that whoever
I
say,
I don't think I've come across anybody like that yet.
oh
Many
yeah, yeah.
people, maybe a year and a half ago, yeah, people were worried or they felt maybe they were being forced to go back. I don't even recall many times that happening, but today I can think of several people just this week who were very excited to get back to the office to collaborate face to face and just to
Yeah.
interact
Yeah.
with other people.
Yeah, we had a 2-hour meeting yesterday, in fact, with the clients, and it was in person. It was on whiteboarding, and just like old times. I was exhausted after that. Can you believe it? I was mentally exhausted. I was drained, as drained as. And it's like, oh, I haven't stretched this muscle in so long. Literally,
Right.
my leg muscles, right? Because here I am in my home. I had to get up and go to the train again and come back. It's a while, but yeah, getting up and doing that collaboration was something that I missed. I missed that going back to the office and doing that kind of stuff. And I don't know if that's meaning to me. I don't know. Maybe to you define that as meaning, because it was that group collaboration, and it was a reason to go back to an office and say, "Hey, let's work on this together." And we got more done, I think, in 2 hours than probably a week's worth of emails and little one-on-one chats and stuff like that than we ever would.
Absolutely. And I hope leaders out there are taking note of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? When we are interacting, when we're face to face, when we find the task at hand, the request to do something meaningful, it's invigorating.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I just heard you say. It's enjoyable. It's fun. Yes, it takes energy, especially when we're not used to exercising that muscle or many of those muscles. But when there's that buy-in, when the people tasked with the assignment find it meaningful, right?
Mm-hmm.
The collaboration is more powerful, it's more connected, and it gets done quicker.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's an important factor in how we choose our work groups and what assignments we give people. And that comes down to one of my other favorite areas of study is assessment and knowing ourselves, right? Knowing ourselves as individuals, but then
Okay.
also knowing our teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love using, many people use the DISC or different strengths inventories. I like the Myers-Briggs type indicator.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually working with a group locally right now. We're going to break down the entire team and understand the relationship dynamics and where things are working well and where they can improve. And that's invigorating for me.
Now, tell me more about that relationship dynamics. That's a really
Mhm.
interesting topic here, because I think that it's something we've either lost or forgotten, or maybe it's just that muscle that we haven't stretched in a while. Like,
Mhm.
um, tell me more about that. I want to hear more about that, because especially with a team, there's probably lots of people who are coming to an office who've either never met their team or haven't met them in 2 years. The team has changed. People quit, come back, and stuff like that. And now we're just dropped into a scenario where we're all kind of feeling that same kind of thing right now. How do you approach that? How do you get around that?
Oh, so many ways. So fun, right? I mean, so the Myers-Briggs, many people are familiar with just the difference between introverts and extroverts, right? I mean, that's pretty
Right.
common in
Mm-hmm.
society to talk about people being introverted or extroverted. Unfortunately, I mean, I think when we talk about it commonly, we lose some of the science. Well, the introverts are the ones in the corner reading a book, and the extroverts are running the meeting and just, talking all the time. And that's very often true. But then we don't realize the fact that if we're not paying attention, or we don't even know who the introverts are at a meeting in a group, we might be losing some very valuable insight and feedback if we
Yeah. Yeah.
don't ask them these things. Introverts, they don't. It's not that they don't want to talk; they are so busy processing what's going on One of the differences between people preferring introversion and extroversion is this idea that extroverts process verbally. You always know what an
Mm-hmm.
extrovert is thinking because it's coming right out of their mouth.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, introverts process internally. The good stuff's going on quietly inside. And so while the extrovert is busy talking, the introvert is just taking it in. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
okay,
Mm-hmm.
sure. And then the extrovert will say, well, what do you think about that? And then they don't pause long enough because the introvert literally has to switch function in their brain and say, okay, now I get a chance to respond. Let me formulate a good response. It takes time. But as an extrovert myself, sometimes we don't give other people that time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Human beings are only comfortable. I think the last study, maybe 10 years ago, is we can go about 7 seconds in silence before we just want to jump all over
Yep.
everything.
Yep.
I think in the past 2 years, that's maybe changed to like 3.5 seconds.
If not shorter, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Hello, is your mic gone, or is it just?
Are you muted there? We're not
Yeah, are you
hearing you
muted?
talk.
What's going on?
Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember now consciously thinking and counting to 7. That's my what, and I learned that from I think it was a Yale or Harvard YouTube video on speaking, and it was just that. It was just on count to 7 in your head, because first it'll engage people to want to talk, or it'll create question, or it'll give space to people who need it. I like the way you put extroversion and introversion. That I always felt that they're a bit too binary for me. I felt like, if you're not one, you're the other. Which one are you, Cam? Are you an extrovert or are you an introvert? And I was like, well, there's some situations where I really want to just sit back and think about the problem first before just jumping out. But then you get a beer in my hand and I'm out on Friday night and I'll be all around. Like I'm talking to people left, right, and center. I'm engaging, and I'm just like, but that's me. Like I think it matters on the scenario and the situation as well.
Yes, certainly. We are not either or. We may prefer one dominantly at different times in life, right? But we can definitely flex between the two of them. There, it's not an either or, good or bad. It's more of a spectrum of we slide back and forth between things. We can behave as though either. It's just if we prefer one of them, if we prefer being social and extroverted, sometimes being quiet and taking in something, processing, it just takes energy. An introvert can go out and speak and be in the public, but it's just going to take a lot of energy, which is important in a work situation.
Yeah.
For leaders and managers to understand, if yes, that person that I'm going to refer to engineers because they're very often the introverted thinking type, right? They can get up and give a great speech, and they can put all the facts together and share them. It's just going to take energy from them, and they're going to need to recover. So don't ask them to do that back to back twice in one day.
Yeah, that's a big one. I always thought that's why I'm a speaker now instead of a software developer, because I would just, I don't know, I needed to work the problem out. And that's why when doing that pair programming or coding or like those kind of bounce off each other sessions were like, to me, so valuable. Hey, I got a really interesting question here. I want to jump at it. So Emily has a question here and she wants to know, can you talk about how the pandemic has brought access to folks like herself to a lot of the world that was inaccessible before? Everyone needed to work from home. And maybe I'll just kind of contextualize this a little bit more, because one of the big things, in fact, last year, LinkedIn did a research, and the Wall Street Journal came out with a study, and they talked about how 78% of jobs now have accessibility. No, I'm sorry. There's been an increase of 78% to the amount of jobs with accessibility in their title. And that's because a lot of companies started to find out that there is inadequate amount of accommodations for people with disabilities at home, and looking at something as easy as subtitles and captions on videos, and Zoom now integrating it for free, which, by the way, was a big problem during the pandemic. At the beginning, you had to pay for captions, and then they released it as out in the open. So anyway, that was a win for the community. But these types of accommodations are so valuable for people because it allows someone with anxiety to no longer have to work in a setting where they feel uncomfortable. It allows people who are deaf or hard of hearing to be able to access the meetings without needing an interpreter or without needing any kind of translator or things like that. What do you have to comment on this? I'm kind of curious from your side.
Well, I think the disruption we all felt during the past 2 years, for whatever, so many reasons, whether it was staying at home or working in ever increasingly more difficult situations, it caused a lot of us to reevaluate work and the meaning we find there, but it also caused our jobs to look at what's best for the company, but also best for the employees.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when in any kind of crisis like that, we have opportunity to make positive change, to come to more understanding, or of course, we allow the crisis to be negative and detrimental, and we saw many businesses close up and not survive.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that kind of crisis just it kind of caused everybody to reevaluate work and the work environment,
Yeah,
and some of
totally.
that was being more understanding, providing more accessibility, more opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like one of the guests I had on here a while ago. He was talking about how the pandemic has just helped him so much because now the last year of his school he was still online. He's blind, and so he needs help from the teachers. He needs help from other students to either accommodate in certain ways, like making sure that all your text is usable by screen readers or whatever other kind of technology. And it was a really interesting conversation because we are surrounded with a lot of the negatives of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to remember that it's change, right? Like it is change, and
Mm-hmm.
what positives can come out of this are some of those technology changes, or even just the awareness of people with disabilities or accommodations that need to happen. And I've spoken to other higher education teachers who've now said, "Yeah, I can now teach in this way, and all my students learn it better.
Mm-hmm.
They accept it more." So that was a really interesting avenue to hear from them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we treat a crisis as an opportunity to change and grow, in the field of logotherapy, we talk about turning suffering into achievement.
Mm.
And throughout Dr. Frankel's books and a lot of other books on logotherapy, we see many examples of people who have gone through terrible situations in life, trauma, crisis, or pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to that idea of we choose our attitude towards it, we choose how we want to handle it. We can either let it bring us down, or
Mm-hmm.
we can choose to do something positive about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when we
Mm-hmm.
do that, it's meaningful, it's healthy, it allows us to take ownership of that crisis, of that situation, and grow from it.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. We have another comment here. Let's see. So, I think it was earlier on when we were talking about speaking to management or speaking
Mm-hmm.
to leadership about some of the challenges, maybe around, if I'm feeling that I don't have meaning in work. And the
Mm-hmm.
comment was, what about leadership actually articulating to their staff the impact and value that the person's work is, that the work is doing, and what those outcomes look like? And so this is that, like, I think that return feedback of it shouldn't always be up to the employee. I think first off, it
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't always be up to the employee to go to their lead and say, I'm being burned out. Like, I think it's a two-way street. But
Mm-hmm.
number two, what I hear in there is also if leadership communicates the benefits and the value and the impact that it's having, I think that's great for anyone who's feeling that kind of struggle, that stress, that burnout, the loss of meaning. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that's a necessary but lost component of leadership,
Ah,
right? Of you have to touch the people that you are leading, or else you're just a boss, right? If you truly want to lead people, you need to know who they are, what they're doing, what their needs are. Whether it's a small group or a bigger organization, I mean, we all have direct reports or people that we're directly responsible for leading. Well, you got to know them in their situation. So I do agree. It is the leader's responsibility as much as it is the person who might be struggling to know about that and to have a dialogue around it. When we talk about outcomes, well, absolutely. People can't change, improve, grow, find meaning if they don't know what the expected outcome is. And
right,
if there is,
right.
we were talking about those that want to be a part of a particular team, and how much enjoyment there is, and meaning and fun, and when you're given this assignment to do, it gets done. But you have to know what the outcome is, what the desired outcome
Right.
is, and human beings want to achieve and make those things happen.
Mhm.
But if the leader is not clarifying what those outcomes are, well, there's probably going to be a problem.
Right. It can't just be to make more money for the
Right.
for the shareholders, right?
Right. And it's ironic you bring that up. That was one of my favorite books. The Doctor and the Soul is considered to be Viktor Frankl's just magnum opus, right? And he gives that example. My goodness, he wrote that 70 years ago. He talks about, nobody wants to work for the angry boss that's just hammering away just to make more money for himself or for the company, right?
Right.
There's got to be meaning in there. And
Yeah.
we still, he wrote that 70 or 80 years ago, and we still see it today. And
Isn't that wild, right? Yeah. Like we're same lessons. It doesn't matter what it is. Same lessons, whatever, 80 years later or whatever, or whatever that number was. I'm remembering something when I was told to stop asking how people's day was. I thought that was so interesting because in an office, if we're all going back to the office, right? If we're meeting and hey, how's it going? How was your weekend? Stuff like that. And then all of a sudden it turned into, well, we don't need to ask that question anymore. Let's just get right into the meeting, right? Let's just jump right in here. And I don't know. I thought that was so weird. It wasn't at this current, I'm not employed right now. I mean, I work for myself, but it wasn't with my current client. It was in the past. It was like, we got to stop always talking about our day at the beginning of the call. And I said, what? That blows my mind. I can't connect with anyone unless I know how your day was. You know, like how was your
That just
morning,
sounds
right?
so unnatural.
Yeah.
I can't think of a single, whether it's a Zoom call or anything, or personal relationship where that's critical.
Right.
Most of the Zoom calls I've been on in the past 2 years, you always start a few minutes early and you're just chit chatting with whoever else happens to be there. Well, that's
Right.
natural. We go back to this idea that human beings are wired for connection. We need that. It's not just about go get the job done. The job gets done better, more effectively when we're connected with the people we're working with.
Yeah, absolutely. And understanding, I think that's so lost, or it was so lost. I wouldn't really call anyone during the pandemic to just shoot the shit, as they say, right? Like I wouldn't just call someone, hey, Dan, tell me more about your dog. You could be in the middle of something and I lost that. But maybe that's a me thing. Sometimes I think about that. I need that so much that I'm not taking into account what other people need. And maybe they don't need that as much, or they need it in a different way than what I would project. Because I need that. Hey, tell me about your dog. Dr. Dan, tell me about your dog. You told me about your dog last week. Your dog wasn't doing so well. Tell me about your dog. And I would call someone up like that. But some people either weren't in that mood or in that setting because we lose those social cues, right? You sit down before a meeting and we're all kind of there just waiting. Well, what else are we going to do? What else are we going to talk about? Let's talk about, let's connect for a little bit, right?
Well, too often people sitting there waiting for a meeting are picking up their smartphones and checking their latest whatever. when we should be engaging in more conversation like this.
Unless they're checking into this LinkedIn Live, right? I mean,
well, absolutely, that's
a whole lot.
Very meaningful.
Right. Dan, we've only got a couple of minutes left here on the show. I want to give you an opportunity, to pitch, to ask, like, how do people contact with you? How do people work with you? What's it like to work with you? Why don't you tell us more about you and the business and the podcast and stuff like that?
Well, I've heard working with me is pretty good, but I'm not sure anybody would answer that question differently. So you can find out more about what I'm doing. You can check out the Meaning Project podcast, where I have a lot of conversations like this with other people, or just, if I'm on my own on the podcast, I'm just spouting off logotherapy and existential analysis and positive psychology. So the Meaning Project podcast, if you want to get to know more about me, DanielAFranz.com. That's DANIELA. FRANZ.com. My website talks a little bit about the consulting I do, the therapy I do, the psychotherapy I do. And you can really, if you want to connect, I don't think we live in a world where it's impossible not to connect these days.
Yeah.
You can find my email. We're all on LinkedIn together, Facebook, Insta, we're all out there, right? So if you want to know more about me, I try not to be hard to find.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. I guess I got one more question for you here, because I like to think about, like, if I had a takeaway, if you had a billboard that you could put up on Times Square, something like that, what would you put up there? Or maybe what kind of message or meaning? I'm not looking for the exact words, but what would you put out there?
Discover meaning every day.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's only a few words, but there's so much there. If we look at that meaning triangle and, go be creative, go connect with other people, go experience the world and life and everything that's out there. If more people were doing that, I think we'd have a bit of a healthier culture. If more people just knew that they were supposed to, that there's this drive there that they might be feeling. I think we'd have a lot less anxiety and depression, and a lot less psychotropic medication floating around.
Mm-hmm. That's a big one at the end. I'm not going to jump on the medication piece. I think that's something in and of itself. Caitlin jumped in with a question here, or at least a comment, which I thought was really interesting. Recovery from burnout. She recommends therapy and self-compassion and food. I like that food piece, Caitlin. That's great. Practically speaking, employee resource groups, though they may seem a little saccharine, can be a great way to leverage our jobs for more meaning. if we can find a way to compel our business leaders to put, I'm looking over my mic here, resources behind efforts for good, we can change our time and work positively. What do you have to say to that?
I fully agree.
I like the food bit. First off, I love the food piece, Caitlin. I think
right, absolutely. Now, is it not too much? Everything in moderation. We don't want
moderation.
and ideally healthy, brain building food. But employee research, I love this idea. Right, people connecting over important topics and how to find more meaning at work. I mean, what better opportunity? It sounds wonderful, but you're right. We need to convince more leaders, more managers, more supervisors, more companies that this is important. And I think we are. I think the past 2 years has definitely shown a lot of work situations the importance of connection and meaning and all these opportunities that Caitlin's talking about.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Dan, with that, thanks so much for being on the show today. This has been really great. I love having these types of conversations because I think it kind of puts perspective on where we are, what we're doing, and I mean, putting meaning into the day-to-day, because we do. I think a lot of us realize that we spend sometimes so much time giving to a company or giving to whatever, giving outside of ourselves, and either we don't take time for ourselves or don't take time for our family, which is a really big, much bigger conversation than I think that we could get into just in a 45-ish minute kind of talk here. But yeah, and the lines were blurred definitely during this pandemic, the past 2 years, between I gotta go downstairs and help people out, or help my son, or go pick him up from school, or he was on Zoom classes and meeting and stuff like that. Couldn't get all my work done. Had to come back upstairs at 9 p.m. to come and do that. And that was like this endless cycle, right? That we tend to get looped up in. So now it's things are finally opening up, and I hope people change or see the change and start to think about ways to put meaning back in their life.
Absolutely.
If it was ever lost. Yeah. And with that, Dr. Dan, thanks so much. Thanks everyone for joining. Next week, I've got Kirsten Ross on the show. She's going to be talking about business creation and selling products and stuff like that. Totally different from what we've been talking about here, but also the fear of getting out there and trying to pitch a product. So we've got a really interesting show next week coming up. So it's all great. But any last thoughts, Dr. Dan?
It was an absolute pleasure. When you're ready for those conversations about psychotropic medication or anything else, mental health, I will be excited to join in. So
you bet. That's a future episode right there.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for joining. Thanks everyone.
Cam. I appreciate it.